All right. Hey, everybody. We've got Tim Armacost here today, who's going to talk about his new book, the Jazz Saxophone book. Very cool resource. If those of you who don't know who Tim is, he is an international touring jazz saxophonist. He's played with lots of great musicians: Roy Hargrove, Tom Harrell, Jimmy Cobb, Jeff Tain Watts, a bunch of huge names, Kenny Barron, etc. And he also teaches at Queens College in New York City, where he lives and is his home base. Um, and anyways, we're just excited to dive in and talk about his new book. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, cool. So, um, I guess just first of all, what inspired you to write the jazz saxophone book? Did you see something missing out in what existed already?
I did actually. That's an interesting way that you asked that question. I didn't start out with the idea of writing a jazz saxophone book. You know, Dave Liebman is still alive, and Sonny Rollins is still around, and there's a you know, whole lot of guys out there who could have written the jazz saxophone book. I would have thought that presumptuous to start out writing the jazz saxophone
Okay,
book.
sure, sure.
And so the way it happened was I went down to the Gen Festival and a Gen conference in New Orleans in just before the lockdown 2 years ago. And I had met Chuck Scher a few times, so we knew each other to say hello. I went down to shake his hand, and we got to talking, and I said, I've been thinking about writing a book about melody. To answer your question, that's the thing that I kind of felt like could be useful to people. Uh, Harmony is mathematical. It's all rules and regulations. You can write that
Yeah.
down, and it's pretty straightforward to teach. There's lots of material on harmony and improvisation. There's a lot of great stuff on improvisation, and there's a lot of rhythmic innovation happening in the music in the last 20 years. So that the combination of that rhythmic innovation and harmonic knowledge being generally available, I found makes the music to be heavily weighted in those two directions. And I thought maybe it'd be interesting to talk a little bit more about melody. There aren't that I looked around and I couldn't really find anything outside of the classical world that explained what melody is. And part of the reason for that is because it's kind of a mysterious little
Yeah, yeah, cool.
animal.
Actually,
So
I loved seeing that. Right, like I saw that chapter on melodic improvisation. I was like, oh crap, let's check this. It's like usually it's chords and okay,
yeah,
chords and scales. Good job, guys. We love chords and scales.
right,
Anyways, it's
right.
cool. Anyways, great.
So I pitched Chuck on that idea. I said, I'm thinking about writing a pithy volume, a short volume on with some ideas about how you can explore melody. And Chuck's response was, "That sounds like a really nice idea. Why don't you make that a chapter in a longer book?" And I said, a longer book, eh? And I said, let me think about that. And I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next morning with this idea of the anatomy of a song. That I could write a book where the frame, the shape of the book was playing a song from start to finish. And I went back to Chuck the next day. It was the last day of the conference, and I said, "What do you think about this idea?" And he said, "That sounds kind of good. Why don't you make me an outline and we'll work on it for a little while." And we did, and then it got bigger than that.
Uh huh.
The process and became a freaking 2 year marathon of writing. I really did not know what I was getting into, and probably wouldn't have agreed to do that if I'd known what it meant. Because back
Sure.
then, that was before the pandemic, so I was touring and running around all over the place, and I wouldn't have seen how to do that. But the pandemic hit and shut us in our houses for 2 years, and wow, I guess this is something I'm going to do during those
Yeah.
2 years, and so yeah, so that's kind of how it happened. And Chuck was very, very useful. Useful is the wrong word. Very helpful as an editor and a publisher. He helped me a lot to organize the material. So yeah, and then 2 years later,
Cool.
here we are. We got something.
Yeah.
We got something
So
that actually exists.
so something positive came out of the pandemic. Good to know.
For me, it did. Yeah, there were a lot of negatives, of course,
Of
including
course.
people who I know who passed. Hopefully,
Sorry.
they're resting in peace. But yeah, for me, I was able to find a way to be disciplined and productive, which helped pass the time.
Yeah. All right. So, did you get a call from Sonny Rollins yet? Now that you wrote the saxophone book, the jazz, did he call you
How
like,
dare you?
Tim Armacost, what the hell? What are
Who do
you
you think you
thinking?
are? No, and I'm actually one of the things I'm most proud of is the people who endorsed the book. We sent it out. I sent it out to a few saxophonists who I know and respect, and Chuck did the same. And they came back with really glowing uh, endorsements, and that makes me feel fantastic. I'm really proud of
Yeah, absolutely. And it was cool to see that it wasn't just great saxophonists. They all those guys are great saxophonists, but they are also, a lot of them are great lifelong educators.
it. Yeah.
And so that means, that means a lot. I was gonna comment on that, but anyways, cool. Well, let's dive into the
Hmm.
content here. So the book obviously is a lot about improvisation, along with we see the whole song form approach to the song form in your set and artistry and all that, which is awesome. But there's a lot about improvisation in the book. And I really liked how you introduced improvisation through the idea of variation.
Uh huh.
Something I think gets overlooked a lot of times. Honestly, I overlook it myself in my own teaching and probably playing. Um, so, can you tell me about how you use variation to get students started, or even more advanced students,
Yeah.
to continue developing?
Yeah. A couple of things came to mind that guided the way I wrote this section, or started with this idea, and the main one is the historical one, that the music, the this the New Orleans musicians who invented this style, they started by just playing variations on the melody. That's how the whole thing started. Here were these musicians, and they were playing in a parade, and they maybe I wasn't there, so I don't know the details, but maybe they didn't. Excuse me. Let me just turn off my mail program for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know all the details, but the way I imagine it, they were guys who were playing in a parade or playing in a social situation, and they got a little bored of playing the same melodies the same way day after day and set after set. And so they said, well, let me see what I can do to make this more interesting for myself. And so they started just by stepping out into the zone of improvisation by varying melody. And uh, so for me, that's a constant element now in what I do, and I also think it's the logical first step to ask young people to do, to get them started with the idea. And kind of what I was countering in part of the idea of talking about it also was to counter the idea that you give a student a scale and say go ahead, because the way I talk about it in the book is that's like saying, okay, let's speak in German today. You start.
Here's a
Right?
dictionary. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Even here's one sentence in German, now express yourself. And
Yeah.
I thought that seemed a little backwards. So I think it works better, and it's also true of improvisation generally, that what you're doing is moving things around that are known elements. You're not reinventing the wheel every time you pick up the saxophone.
No.
So
Yeah.
so I thought, let's give, rather than telling a kid, here's the blues scale, go. I think it's more interesting for the kid to say, here's a nice little melody. Uh,
Or even here's a melody on the blues scale.
yeah,
So
exactly.
anyways, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So just for example, I don't know if this is going to blow out my microphone or not. So
We'll find out.
is that okay?
It's
Is
pretty
that
good. It's pretty good.
so? That was just random, but there's a little melody. I just made it up, and you can give that to a kid and then say, try that and notice how it works all the way through the blues. You don't have to tell them that the scale fits all the chords, which it doesn't exactly. You know what I mean? It's kind of weirdly complicated. But if you just start them with a melody, then you can move from there.
Yeah.
And and so I think that's the logical place to start. And then if you give kids or anybody, I have adult students who are also just starting. If you give them a couple of different melodies and then show them how to put them together and link them together into lines, then you're off on the path.
Yeah, awesome. When I think of this subject, I think of Charlie Parker, and for a couple reasons. One is because if you listen to enough Charlie Parker solos, you hear him varying his own
Uh-huh.
content. You know, it's like
Right.
obviously, I mean, he basically kind of. I mean, I'm sure it was through a creative variation process, but he basically kind of invented a new language of improvisation in a way.
Yes, he
Um,
did.
yeah, and so anyways, so he had less content to work with than some of the, once you go down the
Yeah,
road some, whatever 50 years, and
yeah.
people have taken Charlie Parker's stuff and developed it a whole bunch more. Um, but so anyhow, I saw a cool study at one point that basically looked at all of Charlie Parker solos and broke down his content into like 5 to 12 note chunks, and you could
Uh-huh.
like literally look at he had like a whole encyclopedia of content
Yeah.
that, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see how you could just trace all these things through all of Charlie Parker solo, anyway, or solos. So it really convinced me in that moment that I was looking and studying that improvisation is a variation thing.
Yeah.
And that was on the microscopic level, and then I saw another thing that looked at Bill Evans's solos and broke it down on a macroscopic level and looked at, like, how he was navigating the changes with these kind of anchor notes that created an overarching melody out of his little microscopic improvised melody. Yeah, it's very cool to see that. Anyway, so at the microscopic level and macroscopic level, it looks like variation, but the fun thing is it begins so simply, like
Yeah.
you outlined, with some melody. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I
Our
think the other thing that's important to point out about Parker's playing is that it never sounds exactly the same. He he plays those lines, but you'll never hear him play it exactly the same way again.
Yeah,
The content, the shapes, and the stuff he's working with is is uh, is consistent across time, but you can tell that he's improvising purely in the sense that he's aware of when he's playing something that's one of his licks, and he finds a way to change it, finds a way to exit differently, finds a way to change it along the way. He's always improvising with the known material. He's striking a
yeah,
beautiful balance between the known material and not knowing what he's going to play next.
yeah.
I find it, especially his blues playing, still to be unmatched in beauty and
There's I agree. He's yeah. I mean, when I first heard Charlie Parker when I was like a really young kid, it was like one of the first albums that someone got me.
uh-huh.
Like Charlie Parker with strings, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't hit the right things for me. First of all, it was with strings. I was like, I want something more energetic or
I hear
whatever.
you. Yep.
But and I didn't understand I couldn't comprehend what was so genius. Everyone says Charlie Parker's great. I'm not hearing it.
Yeah.
Come back a few years later, and it's just like, oh my goodness, this guy is I mean, he's a genius on so many levels, but the rhythmic variation and interest that he creates, even when he's like playing the fastest notes you've heard, just amazing. So precise, rhythmically so hip. um yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad we could geek out about that for a second.
But I got to add one thing because
Yeah,
my
go for it.
experience, I had that experience with Coltrane. I was
Me
I was
too.
aware of Coltrane, and a friend told me to go down and get some Coltrane records, and without any guidance. So I was like 14. I got my brother to drive me to the store, the record store back in the old days. And there were a bunch of bins, and I was flipping through the bins, and the one I chose was Live in Seattle from 1967, I think.
Oh, yeah,
Way
okay.
out in the
Great
stratosphere
entry level, right?
in the
No.
Hyperion, and my brother and I put that on and we listened to it and we were like, "This is horrible. We hate this. It's really ugly." And a couple, it was quite a while later actually. I didn't really get back to Coltrane until, well, I learned a couple of solos in college, Moments Notice and a couple other things, but I didn't really get it yet. And I met a guy in Amsterdam when I moved there when I was in my 20s, and he overheard me say something really stupid about Coltrane, and he goes, "Man, shut up, you idiot! Come to my house on Monday night. I'm making you spaghetti. We're going to listen to Coltrane all night long." And that's what he did. He played me Coltrane. He showed it to me in historical order, and finished, or along the way we got to some of those incredible cadenzas on "I Want to Talk About You," and and then it was all different after I understood what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. I had a similar Coltrane revelation. It was like, oh my goodness, also amazing, and also I was really dumb.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was I was ignorant.
yeah, exactly.
Fortunately, I had a mentor to set me straight.
Awesome. All right, so back on this idea of melodic variation.
Yeah.
In the book, you talk about drum lessons leading to a discovery or realization about melodic improvisation. I'm hoping you could share a little bit about that with us.
Are you talking about the lesson with Michael Carvin where he told me about the way I played the melody and stepping into the
Yeah,
improvisation? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. That was. Thank you, Michael. Another great person who I just happened to come in contact with, and was good enough to give me some lessons. So I was studying drums with him. I was interested in learning how to. What I wanted to do was know how to play polyrhythmically. I wanted to explore polyrhythm more in my own playing, and I also wanted to be able to talk to the drummer about what it was he was doing. So we only knew each other with me as a novice drummer. With obviously at that I was already 30 something, so I knew some jazz by that point, but he didn't know me as a saxophonist. And so then after we had a few lessons, he said, "Okay, bring your horn in. Let me hear what you sound like on your own, on your first instrument." So we did that. We did quite a few lessons where we played together, and then the lessons became a little bit more about music generally and not just about the drums. And interestingly, when I got really close to being able to play with four-way independence, there was a moment where he said, "Stop thinking about it. Just do it now." And that, in fact, what got me across. He was able to get me to turn off my mind that was trying to do it from thinking and analysis and just find it, which I did, which was a great lesson. But the one that
Yeah.
you're asking about came after I went on a tour in Japan, he said, "Bring me some recordings from the tour," and so I took in a recording and we listened to a song that I'd written, and he said, he listened and he said, "You have a nice atmosphere as you play the melody. You're singing the melody from your mind's ear, uh, and it sounds like you're already improvising, but you're doing it. You're delivering the melody accurately while also beginning to improvise a little bit. Sounds really nice." He said, "Then, when you're finished with the melody, it sounds like you close the door and step into another room, and now you're just improvising, and it doesn't have anything to do with the melody." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. That is what I'm doing." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I've been practicing all this stuff, in the practice room all these years, and I guess I guess, and I went on to make up some excuse, and he said, "Yeah, you've been practicing all these years. That's fine, but the way you're doing it means that every song you play, you're playing the same solo." And again, yeah, mind blow, complete revelation. So the upshot is, if you just treat the melody as something to get out of the way so you can deliver your stuff, we'll use a polite word.
Yeah.
Uh,
Your shitty stuff. No, just kidding.
Nicely done. Well played, sir. Uh, yeah, then you wind up playing the same solo on every tune. And I know some famous improvisers who sound like that. And that was one of the most productive lessons I got in my whole career of studying, because it helped unleash this idea that if you play, talking about Charlie Parker and the blues, if you play Cheryl and Relax in the Camarillo on two successive nights, those are two different tunes. Even though they're both Charlie Parker melodies on a C blues, they are two different songs. So if you just cast away the melody and then just deliver your shit, from night to night, you're not really getting there. You're not really in the zone of real improvisation. And that was, yeah, Michael Carvin. He moved out to the West Coast. I don't see him anymore. But, I haven't been traveling for 2 years, of course.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was a really, really deep lesson he gave me.
Yeah, that's an eye opener. I think something that I've heard from other musicians, our teachers and mentors, and it's a hard one to get through consistently to your, like for me, like in my own development, it's hard for me to always remember that idea. But obviously, improvisation is a lot less stale when you can use that inspiration and make a connection. And
Yeah.
anyways,
And like everything else, that's not the approach I'll take to every solo either. You know,
yeah,
that's one of the many paths that is available, and it's good because it also makes you address the it asks you to address the tune more deeply, learn the lyrics, learn the phrasing, get dive a little deeper into the melody itself and find out what's there for you to work with. There's a whole lot of there's a whole lot of meat on the bones there, and again, if you're especially for younger or less experienced improvisers, if you're wondering what to do, the melody is just a huge source of stuff. It's not that difficult to get started if you do that.
awesome.
And one of the things I demonstrate also in the videos is just playing a melody for 10 choruses. Just just playing that same melody over and over and finding some variations on it. I can do that. I can do that for a long time and still have
Awesome. Would you mind doing it for a short time right now?
fun. Sure, why not? We may get into some copyright issues, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Ooh, yeah, we'll see. Well, if we get into copyright issues, it just means that someone can't make money off of it, which I
Right,
don't
but we
make
can still
money
share
off
the
this anyways. Yeah.
cool. And we can still share the love. Okay,
Yep.
so I just mentioned relaxing the camera. I'll play a little bit of that.
Woo! Yeah,
For
man.
for
That's
example.
for example. That was only pedagogically useful, but also amazing. Thank you. Cool. Yeah, beautiful. Actually, so okay, so let's just clarify for the listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the tune or what you just did. You gave us one chorus in on the head of a 12 bar blues
Yeah.
and then improvised using the melody in bits and pieces for the next 5 or 6 or 7 choruses and then head out.
And then I played the head out, and by the time I got to the head out, I couldn't not change it. I was still playing variations. I got pretty close to the original, but I was
Yeah.
pretty far into the head of changing things, so I didn't give it to you pure.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of my favorite improvisers do, especially if it's like a quartet setting, just a single person on the head.
Right.
They do cool things. Yeah.
That's one of the things I talk about in the melody chap. In the anatomy of a song section, I talked about the approach to the melody, and there are players like Miles Davis, who reinterpret the melody, or Betty Carter's another good one, who reinterpret the melody so radically that they actually wind up making up new melodies for the song. But their sense of melody is so deep that it sounds almost like that's the way the melody should have gone. There's guys like that, and then there are people who deliver the melody much more precisely and specifically, uh,
Okay. Yeah.
which is kind of closer to the concept in the classical world of delivering the composer's intent. Is one of those right and the other wrong? No. That's that's kind of two points on the spectrum of the way that you can deliver the melody. I kind of lean myself towards delivering as delivering the melody as accurately as possible, but with the idea that I don't have to be stuck to that. I can start improvising right away.
Very cool. Yeah, I love it. All right, so we just heard you play for for a little extended period, and you sound fantastic. Can we just take a little detour from improv? Can you tell us what your setup is? And I mean,
Oh, sure.
obviously, you're the one playing the horn, but always interesting. What are you playing on?
Little saxophone geekery. I always love that.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is a Kyleworth. Most people know the name Kyleworth. I don't know if you can see it, but on the bell is written H. Coof. So Herbert Coof was the guy who um, marketed these horns for Kyleworth back in the 70s when they first started producing them. And Kyleworth, rather than following the Selmer model, followed the King and Kahn model. So the camera might be distorting it a little bit, but that's a unusually large bell, and it's big and ringing, and the metal on this horn is really vibrant. So it doesn't have that kind of pure, pretty thing that the Selmer, you know, the Selmer horns tend to embody. This is more of a King and Kahn honking kind of horn.
Yeah.
I've had it since I was 16 or 17. I bought it new,
Wow.
and you can see I've abused it all over the world to the point where the lacquer is almost completely gone. And I use a Berg Larson 105 over 2, which I bought when I bought the horn first and then the mouthpiece. But I think I was still 16 or 17 when I bought the mouthpiece, and I've had it
Is
ever since.
is that mouthpiece by chance a Sonny Rollins reference or no?
You know, I that's an interesting moment for me because of my situation where I bought this setup when I was 16 and have never changed, I don't actually know those kinds of details. I never did the mouthpiece search. I did it once, and then I've played the same mouthpiece ever since.
That's pretty unique, I think.
It's rather unusual, and it's the result. It's the product of another great teacher, who when I told him I was going to go get move up from a student horn to a professional horn, the advice he gave me was go to the music store and ask them if you can play all the horns that they have in stock. And he didn't tell me who was playing what or who sounded like what. He just said play everything. And the rolled tone holes on this instrument was one of the things that made me go, wow, that's a kind of a high level of craftsmanship. I like that. And then for mouthpieces, it's the same thing. He said, find the one that feels good in your mouth, feels natural for you, and that sounds the way you want to sound. He didn't tell me how Michael Brecker, got his sound or anybody else. He just
Yeah.
said, go find the thing that works for you. And I'm grateful to this day that he put it on me to listen to my body and my ear and find the thing that worked for me,
Yeah.
rather than trying to copy somebody else, sound wise.
And you have a really individual sound, so clearly
Thank you.
that's really worked out. Yeah, I mean that's just so you know, that's a super high compliment in my book.
Thank you very
Just
much.
yeah,
That's the thing I've been trying to have since I was 20 years old.
right? Yeah. And it's cool to hear you talk about how you just you went and just tried everything and decided on something that was worked for you. It took me a lot of years personally to come to that
Hmm.
realization. I chased way too many other players and
Yeah.
things trying to figure out what I should play on.
There's of
Anyways,
course a benefit from chasing all those players. You learn their vocabulary and you learn
yeah,
how to sound like them. There's definitely benefits to that. But my theory is that eventually you're going to sound the way you sound, no matter what the gear is. You have a particular physical makeup. Your ear wants to hear a certain thing, and your body's going to find its way to that sound, no matter. Charlie Parker. Can you tell the difference on those recordings where he's playing a plastic saxophone? I can't.
yeah. Then to be fair, the recording quality was pretty atrocious back then.
Okay, I'll give you that.
But but yeah, yeah. No, good points. Great points. Um, well, let's get back to the improvisation stuff.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, another melodic kind of technique you talk about in the book is playing a known phrase with different notes. I thought that was a
Yeah.
really cool idea.
Hmm.
You want to talk about it for a second? And maybe play something?
Sure. That's another step down that path of improvisation is not making up a whole new language every time you pick up the horn. It's like speaking English. You have you have I've been using these words all my life, but I've never put them in the order in which I'm putting them right now. I've never used that exact same word order. I'm improvising with the language. You and I are improvising in this conversation. We didn't talk about what we were going to talk about. We just dove in, and here we are talking back and forth. So everybody's an improviser. They just don't really know it, or they're not aware of it. And with saxophone or jazz language, it's really the same thing. There's a lot of standard stuff. There's a lot of things that people play all the time. And if, like we touched on earlier in the conversation, if like Charlie Parker, your motivation is to stay in the improvisation um, zone by, even if you see something familiar coming up, to change it a little bit in the moment, then you can keep the thing fresh all the time. And so one of the ways I just figured out to work on it was to uh, take take known rhythmic melodies, because they give you a little something else to hang on to, and put different notes to them, so that again we're improvising but with something that's known. So uh, monk tunes almost always have a beautiful rhythmic hook in them, and uh, so they're really great. It's a really great source. Any monk tune is almost any monk tune is going to be a really good source for one of these little hooks that you can then play the uh, play the rhythm without the notes. So if we play hack and sack, I think I did Aranel on the video associated with the book. So if we play hack and sack, it's got one of my favorites. That's the last phrase of the melody. Zibadi dit da. I just love that. This is slick little melody. So if I take that rhythmic melody and play different notes to it, it relates to the song. It gives you a little charge of, oh, that's familiar but not at the same time. So it's interesting. Uh, so the whole melody goes. Okay, there's an A section. So
Yeah.
if I improvise with some of that material, so
Nice.
that was just playing the A section over and over again. If that wasn't clear, I probably should have done the tune justice by playing the bridge,
That's all right.
demonstrating something. So,
No, no. Okay, so and I guess it'd be cool to clarify for listeners that you have a very loose approach. You can change the notes, you can change the rhythm, you can, I mean, the focus was on changing the notes in the book, but in practice here, it's a very, you're not constricting yourself to a very laborious kind of work,
yeah.
process, which would actually maybe even hinder improvisation if you get too in your head about it, and you're
Yeah.
using your ear, you're letting your ear kind of guide what's happening rhythmically, harmonically, melodically. We shouldn't get too, anyways, but yeah, I mean, is that accurate?
Most definitely, and thank you for using the phrase laborious process. That's another of my hard pieces of granite that I'm trying to break up with this book, which is uh, I if you're practicing is a laborious process, what you're practicing to become is a player who sounds like he does laborious processes,
Yeah.
and that's, for me, that's not it. I think of practicing as practicing to become the performer that I want to become. So I don't want to sound robotic. I don't want to sound um, like I'm reading the notes off of a teleprompter in front of the audience, and they have to be done in this exact precise way every single time. I don't want to
Wait,
sound
why
like
not, Tim? Why not? Okay, just kidding.
that because my
Cool.
speech teacher told me not to do
Yeah,
that.
right?
Right? So for
Nice.
me, everything should be fun. If practicing isn't inspired and fun, then put it down and go get a bite to eat and come back and see if you can find a way to make it fun.
Yeah, I had a good teacher. I can't even remember who this teacher was actually, but I had someone who I trusted a lot and I enjoyed as a teacher. At one point, telling me, okay, when you're practicing, at least like the last 10% of your practice has to be some like fun improvisation stuff. And I remember hearing that, and I'm like, that's not how I practice. I'm more like 75% fun improvisation stuff.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, it sounds like you're of a similar mind.
Most
Uh,
definitely.
yeah. All right. So I want to fight with you. Ready for the fight?
Yes.
Okay. You put passing tones under in a harmonic category,
Hmm.
and yeah, we learned passing tones as a harmonic thing, but man, for me. And I guess I didn't even think about this till just this very moment. I was
Yeah.
thinking of like neighbor tones too. But anyways, I tend to think of those as interesting ways to shift melody and rhythm and create more interest. I mean, yes, they function harmonically. So can we fight about that? What do you got?
I, I'm okay with everything you just said. So I'm at a loss. I was getting geared up for a fight, but it's interesting actually that you mentioned it because I have to admit that was the chapter that I had the hardest time figuring out where to put in the book. And when it came down to it for me, there wasn't it didn't make sense to me to talk about passing tones before you knew the scales. So I
Right.
decided that I needed to talk about the scales and all of them and get through that because of the way I use them, which is to smooth out scales. That's what I use them for. I use them to help me make, if this is a bar line. Let's see. When you do this on Zoom, your hand moves in the opposite direction. If you're looking at it.
Sure.
So if I have a note on this side of the bar line and a note on this side of the bar line for two chords, say it's all the things you are, and on this side we talk in tenor key. That's the 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 chord on this side of the bar line halfway through the bridge, right? You go 2 5 1 to A major in tenor key, and then on this side of the bar line you have a G sharp minor chord, and that bar line, I think of having a note on this side of the bar line that's a half step or a whole step away from a note on this side of the bar line, and they each are good chord tones, right? All of that. I use passing tones to help me make those transitions
Yeah.
happen more smoothly. That's really the main purpose of it in my playing. So, so that's the answer to the question from my perspective. I decided in the end that because that's the way I use them, it made the most sense for me to explain it in the context of, okay, so here are the scales. Now that you know the scales, here's something you can use to smooth them out a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if them's fighting words or not, but
Just a little bit, because here's why.
yeah.
Because when I heard you play, I didn't hear you just smoothing out your arrivals to the next chord.
Mm,
I also heard you using the chromatic melodic language of jazz.
mm,
Because if you didn't have those chromatic passing tones, it would sound a lot more vanilla.
yeah.
And I mean, that's a super obvious thing. And then the other thing that I just want to clarify for people who are, checking, more beginnerish or middle of the road kind of improvisers that are checking out this interview, um, when he's talking about arriving to the, on each side of the bar line like that,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's not always on beat one. It could be later. It could be earlier, because that's what Charlie Parker helped us learn.
Yeah.
One of the things he helped us learn.
Most
Anyways,
definitely.
yeah,
And you
because
can, well, I have two responses to that. One is I first identify that situation, where I want to make the bar lines clear, and then once I get a transition that I like, then I'll go backwards and find four notes that lead me up to that transition. And after I can do that, I'll find four notes on this side, and then eight notes on this side, and eight notes on this side. So I'm building lines that sound smooth across the bar line.
yeah,
And uh, in the same way, as we get more used to playing stuff that sounds familiar, then I can take something that's familiar and I can move the bar line. If I can do it in a way, if I take a phrase that sounded really good across that bar line, say that I stole from Hank Mobley, I can start at a beat later and make it resolve a beat later. And because I'm working with something that's known, that has, has some familiarity to it, I can move the bar line over and still have it resolve. Uh, that's
yeah.
a
It
that's
still
a
works for our ears, right? It's still, you still hear the
exactly.
changes. You still hear the changes, and it sounds more interesting to me. Well, it has to be in contrast to like some,
Exactly.
it can't
You have to
always be
be
crazy,
able to
but
play it straight before you can
yeah,
play it,
yeah.
before you can move things around a lot.
But yeah, I mean, I can think of players who are very much always right on the change, and that can get tiring. It can get robotic. Without naming any names, it can get a little
We would
robotic.
never name names.
Never name names. Okay,
I think
cool.
that was a very. I think for our listeners, that must have been a very disappointing fight because we pretty much agreed with each
Yeah, we did, and I knew we would. But I thought that's a cool conversation to have.
other. Okay.
Sorry, guys. We'll throw punches another time. You brought your knife, right?
Yeah, but I'm not in the same place as you, so that doesn't
Oh,
matter.
that's right. Virtually stabbing each other is a lot less interesting. Actually, because here we go. There we go. There's the knife. That's kind of funny. Hopefully, I
Simple
don't have to edit
Idaho
that
way.
out. Yeah, that's Idaho for you. All right. Let's see. I had. Oh yeah, cool. So you had a whole chapter on playing out,
Hmm.
which is awesome because there are very few educators or people who tackle jazz education that are willing to like really try to teach that
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I thought that was super cool that you tackled that. You have lots of great tried and true techniques, some stuff from Coltrane, etc.
Yeah.
You also had a little snippet where you talked about using melody to play out,
Hmm.
and I love that. That's kind of how I think about it generally when I
Uh huh.
approach it. Anyways, but so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that melodic approach to playing out, and if you want to do a demonstration, kind of harder without chord changes
Yeah.
that everyone can hear, but you know,
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely harder to hear an outness if there isn't something to contrast it with.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I think the concept, the idea is that outness is easier to get across. Same theme as the whole conversation. Actually, it's easier to get across if you're working with something recognizable. So, the example that came to my mind was on my very first recording as a leader. Uh, Kenny Barron played. There was a so there's a section in the tune. The tune is called "Long Haired Girl," and it's a section, 4 bars of my C minor, B flat concert, B flat minor. So Kenny Barron came on and he said. So he played a melody. It wasn't the melody of the song. It was just something he made up in that moment. And he put it up a half step, and then he took it back down a half step. the thing that the thing that Kenny Barron does so well, that I love, is he doesn't get stuck. He'll play that answer, and then when he goes back, he doesn't just repeat the original melody another time. He moves from there. So I don't remember exactly what he did, but it would be something like this: 1, 2, 3. So you see the idea? He plays a question, an answer, and then the third iteration, he's moving. He's blasting towards the resolution of the next bar line. And I think he does that really brilliantly, um, There's a few people who do that really well. Sonny Rollins comes to mind on rhythm changes, where he'll play a melody and then transpose it for the second set, of, the third and fourth bars, and then might start it a third time in the fifth bar of the bridge, but by then he's already working his way out of the bridge. So that's a concept that I explored at some length in the book. And again, the idea is that the melody, whatever it is, if you transpose it, then you've established something in the listener's ear and your own, and now you're iterating it, and now you can iterate it again. We took it back down, but you could also say, I don't have to stop there. In other words, you can
Yeah.
use your harmony to redefine the sound of the melody, and you're getting further and further away from the chord that you started with, but the ear can follow you there because you're using something that you've established. So
Yeah.
that's the way I think of using melody for playing out, and I'd like to say that that was another occasion where I got a really good lesson from a mentor. I was on one of my early tours was with Ray Drummond on bass, and he took me aside after a couple of nights. He said, "Man, Tim, when I hear what you're doing, you're trying to take it out a little bit, put a little pressure, harmonic pressure on the music." He said, "But you always come back." So, if I was playing a C blues, I would take it out in the third and fourth bars on the way to the dominant in the fifth bar, and then I would always land in on the dominant of the fifth bar. And he was like, "Why don't you?" He said, actually, the way he put it was really deep. He said, when you improvise with melody, you say a melody, and then you say something that responds to that, and then your next one is a response to the second one, and then you move from there again. So it's this constantly unfolding story. And I said, "Yes, that's what I do." And he said, Why aren't you doing that with the harmony?" And I said, "Oh, uh-oh." And then what he said was really deep. He was like, "We'll hear you." You know, that level of confidence in your ability to hear what a guy is going for when he's trying for something. That was really really deep. I was like, man, I hope I get to the point in my career where I can hear everything that's going on around me and have the proper response like he did.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah,
And,
Ray
and
Drummond.
awesome. And what you're talking about really illustrates another thing that I think people get stuck on. They get stuck in their practice room, and they don't. And you can practice playing out with play-alongs and by yourself and all that, but eventually, to really make it something special, got to do it with real musicians.
Yes, you do. And there is an intermediate step that I think some people miss, which is practicing to perform. Uh, for me, the last thing I do in my sort of core hour of practicing is I kick off a tune and play it by myself for 20 minutes. And the intention that I have as I'm doing that is I can't stop. I have to play as if I'm playing with a rhythm section. If I make a mistake, I can't turn around to the rhythm section on the bandstand and say, "Hey, could you guys run it back a couple of bars? I kind of messed up that phrase. I don't like to try that again." You can't do that. So you're practicing to resolve things that are unintentional. You're practicing to do that in time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and in the process, your time's getting better. You can see whether you really know the harmony or not. All of those things are involved. So the the danger then, if that's all you do, is you can wind up sounding like a piano player who only ever plays solo piano, right? He doesn't have he or she doesn't have the opportunity to respond to other musicians. So when they get into a situation where there's other musicians, they don't really know what to do. So yeah, that's just a
Yeah,
chop
yeah.
that you have to learn by playing with other people.
Cool. All right, last improvisation question. Everything we've covered so far, and we haven't even touched. Oh, we've covered lots of stuff. We haven't even touched the mastery section of the book.
Uh-huh.
which is cool that you even have a mastery section. I like that.
Again, totally presumptuous on my part.
Yes, very presumptuous. What are you doing? um, could you maybe just give us a taste of something from that? Whatever
Sure.
strikes you.
Well, we've been talking about melody a lot, and I just mentioned my core practice routine. So the I do three things in my core hour. I divide it into 20-minute sections, and often in practice they become half hours just because I like to get a little deeper into it. So my sort of um, uh, uh, essential practice hour, call it an hour and a half, is a half an hour of working on melody, a half an hour of teaching my inner singing voice to hear something else, to hear something new, uh, teaching myself a new piece of vocabulary, transcribing, and then the third section of 20 to 30 minutes is just improvising, in time, as if I'm the whole band. So in the first section, what I do, and there's a few examples of this in the videos from the book, and also there's a master class or two online, so you can find some more detail about this. But what I do is I play, so I practice melody, and I do that by playing a fifth at the piano somewhere. Since we're doing a lot of stuff in C today, I'll play in C. If I do it in C today, I'm going to do it in something else tomorrow, so that after 12 days, I've played in all 12 keys. And what I do, I have two rules for myself. One is, uh, don't play anything until I hear it in my inner ear first. And the second is, um, don't play anything I've ever played before. So I'm practicing. I'm putting myself in a position where I have to make things up, and that's the first thing I do with my practice day. So, a quick example of that. Okay, so kind of a melody, a little answer to that melody, a third one, and then I'm finding my way home to the root. Another melody. So I'm trying to compose something. Another melody I've
Yeah.
never played before. If I had one spot where I was trying to hear something, didn't come out the way I was hearing it, so I worked with what I played and tried to find my way.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful. Cool.
thank you. So the idea is to respond to what I just played. In other words, play something and then listen for what the next thing should be. Where does the music want to go? What's my
Yeah.
inner ear hearing? And see if I can make a few of those statements that follow one from the other, and play something I've never played before. So if I practice to play um, stuff that I've never played before, right at the beginning of my practice session, I'm training myself to be able to do that, on the bandstand.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a nice counterbalance to all the talk about variation that we just had.
Yeah.
All.
What I thought you were going to say was chords and scales, uh, which is also, it's a nice counterweight to that. Also, I think of chords and scales and lines as one of the really important elements of improvisation. But I also think being able to tell a melodic story is an extremely important skill, especially in terms of communicating with the audience. And
Yeah.
so I try to address that every day.
Yeah, and I guess that that's worth saying right now, and it's kind of been assumed in our entire discussion, but a thorough knowledge of chords and scales is a must for intuitive improvisation.
Yeah,
If
got
you
to
want to
have it.
speak the language, you got to have that underlying foundation. Even if
Yeah,
it's not the place you should start as the very beginner, it's something you got to
yeah.
pick up.
It's a process you have to go through.
Yeah,
There's
just
there You have to learn to think, and then throw that away and just talk, which is what we
nice,
do. That's what we do,
nice.
right?
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've passed the hour mark here, I think. So this is like the probably the polite time for for an interview. But if you are amenable to it, I just had a couple sound questions for you.
Sure.
Okay. Let's pick that. So people talk about working on their sound overtones is a huge,
Yeah.
uh, a huge thing. I I wrote a book on just overtone practice
Hmm.
at one point. Anyways, I think it's super beneficial. But anyway, so I just wanted to see what some of your what you found most beneficial in terms of how you practice them.
Yeah. I also spent a lot of time working on overtones. Um, I also use the piano. I'm lucky. I have access to a grand piano. If you can, if you want to work on your sound, if you can get to a piano, it doesn't have to be a grand piano, but it should be not an electric piano, a piano that has actual strings vibrating in the air. Um, I use the piano also to tell me if my sound is full of overtones, and I do that by like I'll play a fifth now at the piano again. I'll I have the sustain pedal down. I'm not sure if this mic and everything with the zoom and all that if it'll pick it up or not, but can you hear the piano singing?
Not as much as we'd like.
Yeah. So
But
that's
you have a cool video where you demonstrate intonation, practice with the same concept, and maybe I'll put a link to that
okay.
on the page or whatever so that people can check it out.
So the idea is if with the sustain pedal down, I can get the piano to sing back the note that I just played. If it'll sing it back to me, I know that the sound that I'm playing is sympathetic with the piano, and I use that uh, both to develop the quality of my sound and also to get to get better at playing into me. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I do still to this day. And another thing that I did when I was just starting out was I didn't have access at that time. I didn't have access to anything. I was living in a tiny apartment in Amsterdam, and I didn't want to disturb my neighbors. So I played with socks and t-shirts and my bell into the closet, And what I would do then is whenever I could afford it, I would rent a big room at a place called the Crea in Amsterdam, which had practice studios. And I would rent the biggest one they had, which was a dance studio with mirrors on the walls. And I don't know how to describe the size of that book, but that room, but it was a big resonant room.
Yeah.
And I would just fill that room up with sound. I would, after practicing into the closet all week, it was such a thrill to fill that room up with sound, and it sounded so beautiful that it just made my heart open up. And I always tell my students to try to find a resonant space to play in so they can just have fun playing in a way that sounds beautiful. Stairwells are good. Industrial stairwells are really good. Uh, if you have access to a big stage, if you're at a college and you can get up on the stage of one of the auditoriums every now and again, I think that's a nice way to develop your sound as well.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Okay, so you talked a little bit. You touched on intonation there, and so I just want last question. Intonation on saxophone is a bitch. Let's just say that.
Okay. Yep,
It
we
can
can say
be.
that.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, maybe I'll edit it out later.
No,
Anyhow,
we can say it. I think it's okay.
I think it's all right. Yeah, so intonation on saxophone is super obnoxious. It can be I mean, depending on it can be different depending on your horn and your mouthpiece, on your chops,
Yeah.
so many things. So, what kind of techniques have you developed in terms of like actual technical going on embouchure, voicing, whatever, however you think of it and conceptualize it? What kind of techniques have you come up with to help yourself stay on the in tune track? I mean, and I ask that completely respectfully. I can think of many of my favorite players there's plenty of places on a recording where, oh, yep, that got away from them.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Saxophone, I think, is probably one of the most challenging instruments to really to play into.
Yeah. I think part of that is because each horn has its own quirks. Uh, so there isn't Yamaha does a pretty good job of making a horn that plays in tune, generally speaking, out of the box. Uh, but even a Yamaha that's very carefully put together, it's going to have a couple of notes where you have to figure it out. So the the first thing, like the most important thing that I realized is uh, you're kind of taught as a kid that you play a note and the teacher turns on the machine and you can see if your note is in tune by looking at the tuning, right? And the that's not wrong, but all that is a photograph of that moment. And the thing about intonation is that it's always ongoing. You don't just get to do that with the machine. That's good to get your mouthpiece in the right location so that you're in the neighborhood. But intonation is constantly ongoing, and it's an aspect of listening to what you're doing and how you relate to the people around you. And so that's the concept that my early teachers didn't teach me. That it's not just the moment you tune, but it's every single moment that you play. Intonation is a part of how you're adjusting. How you're finding whether your note is resonant or not. So I think that's just an important conceptual thing to keep in mind. And then the way I work on it myself is as I showed with the piano. I start with playing with the piano, which is going to tell me if my sound is in tune with it. So at least I'm relating to one other thing. And I definitely notice if I just pull the horn out of the case and start blowing, I definitely notice that I have to adjust when I sit down at the piano to play with it. I notice that when I don't have a reference in my ear, that my tuning is not as happening.
Okay.
So I definitely advocate playing along with a piano if you have that possibility, and you can do it with recordings too.
Okay. Cool.
Learning to relate every note you're playing to the people around you is critical.
Yeah, and active listening to your intonation while you're playing, man,
It never
that's
stops.
it's a skill. You know, and it's funny because there's so many active listening skills that you develop as an improvising musician. You know, and the more you can get the more you can get those kind of like monitoring listening skills, listening to the drummer, listening to the bass player, listening to the chords, listening to your intonation, listening to your phrases, and and the more you can make those processes automatic, the better you get. But anyways, cool.
It sounds like a lot,
It
and
is a lot. It is a lot,
yeah, it is, and it is.
and that's why it's a lifelong pursuit.
Yes, it
You know.
is. That's
Yeah.
for me. That's part of the charm of it is that I can keep getting better. I'm into it. I'm 40 years in now. I've been doing this since I was 20. I'm almost 69, and it's still just as fascinating to me today as it was 30 years ago.
Awesome. Well, Tim, thank you for doing this interview. Thanks for coming on and talking about saxophone and jazz, and that's a very cool resource. I'll put links up to it in the YouTube video description and on my I've got a blog website that I have, so we'll get it out to people. But thank you again.
Thank you very much for help spreading the word, Ben. And anytime you want to geek out about the saxophone, I'm there with you.
All right, awesome.